The first step in successful marketing is always knowing your audience, congregation, and/or community. You can come up with an incredibly creative message, a cutting-edge design, but if it isn't going to resonate with the people you're trying to reach, it doesn't matter. But to be honest, on this podcast, I often assume that you've done this work first and will gloss over it as we move to dig into whatever specific strategy or tool for marketing we're covering in the episode. But on today's episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we are looking at 3 simple techniques you can employ when you're talking to people in your church or community that will help you get to know them in a way that can inform and shape your church marketing and communications. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and the first approach is one you can use in virtually any context. You might be talking to someone who is already connected to your congregation, and you let them know, hey, I'm trying to better understand what's going on in the lives of our people or in our area. Or you may want to keep it more casual and not make them feel like they need to come up with something specific or profound. You may be talking to someone who's not connected to your church, which certainly makes it a different kind of conversation, right? Here, you might not want to say, I'm trying to gather information so we can market to people like you. Of course, I would never recommend ever saying that specifically. But hey, depending on who you're talking to or what your relationship is with them, you may want to say, we want to get to know our community so we can better serve people like you, so we can be better neighbors and community members. That could certainly be a trust building act. But either way, this first approach can fit into any of these situations. And the technique is to ask someone to tell you a story. Tell me about a time when. So something like, tell me about a time when you felt like a community organization really cared about you. Or what's an experience you've had lately when you felt frustrated? Or I'm looking for something new to do on the weekends with my family. Have you done anything fun in our area lately? You see, you can ask all of these as direct, fact-based questions. What organizations are doing a good job connecting with our community? What's your biggest frustration right now? Or what are some good activities for families in our area? Those aren't bad questions, and you can always ask follow-ups. But when you guide someone subtly into telling you a story, you learn so much more than just facts. First, you can catalog in your mind the elements of the story. Things like characters. Who are the characters in this person's story? Well, there's them, obviously, but what organizations or groups do they mention? Do they connect family or friends or coworkers into this story? Are there any populations in your community that they see as playing a role? Men or women, different ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, interest or affinity groups, political or religious groups? Now, if you ask them about something like frustrations or anxiety, and they tell you a story about their family, maybe it's children who are about to head to college or enter the quote unquote real world, or maybe they're struggling with parents who are getting older, or aunts and uncles they just don't talk to anymore because of partisanship, political or religious. That kind of stuff can really poison relationships. If they mention families, you've learned a lot just right there, haven't you? And as someone who is also the preacher at my church, this kind of insight might be invaluable to your pastor or ministries to learn. You might also be familiar with the story brand framework by Donald Miller. He encourages organizations and companies to think about their relationship with their community, congregation, or customers through the lens of a story. And one of the key mistakes we make is misunderstanding what role our character plays in the story. We think of ourselves often as the hero with the solution to the problems of the people who need us. But, Miller argues, people see themselves as the hero in their own stories. Our role is the guide, like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars or Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. These are beloved figures who have particular knowledge or skills that help the hero of the story. They're absolutely necessary, but that doesn't mean they need to be the hero. Similarly, listen to the roles of the characters in the stories you hear. Does the person actually see themselves as the hero with a problem to solve? Or do they see themselves as a guide in someone else's story? From the examples above, a parent about to send their first child to college is likely not the hero in that story. They want to be the guide, but maybe they don't know how. What's the right balance? How do you be involved without being too involved? How do we encourage them to continue their life of faith at college or in the real world while accepting that they also need to make their own decisions? If you have an event or sermon series or even small group aimed at parents in this stage, knowing how they see themselves in this story is key to connecting to your message. If they see themselves and feel like you actually know them, it can make someone stop and read an ad or a post that they might normally scroll past. Now, what are the two key elements of the plot of a story? Well, you've got the goal and the challenge or obstacle, right? Without a goal, challenge, or obstacle, it's not really a story, just a vignette. Now, vignettes can be helpful. They can give you a static picture of how people see themselves. They can give you a vibe. They can help you speak the language of the people you're trying to reach. But stories have action and movement, even if they're small. Think about something like the Keurig. What is the goal and what is the obstacle? I want coffee, but making coffee is a hassle. My coffee maker doesn't do single servings well. It always comes out lukewarm. So I make a bigger pot, but many days I end up throwing out a bunch of coffee, or I only get one mug and then I come back hours later and now the rest of it's cold. Or let's be honest, some of us are just lazy and the whole process just takes too much time or too much work. I need something that's going to make a passable cup of coffee as simply and quickly as possible. This is not going to be the plot of a major motion picture, but there's a goal there. There are obstacles there. And in their marketing, they can tap into that story. So when someone is telling you their story, listen for the goal and for the obstacles. We can sit in our offices or local coffee shops and just assume, or look at marketing from other brands or churches trying to reach the same kind of people. But nothing beats hearing from real people in your community tell them about their real goals and the real things standing in their way. You have enough conversations with enough people, and I bet you'll start to see a pattern emerge. And it's even better if that pattern has a measure of locality to it. What are the specific obstacles in your community? How does being a member of your specific community shape the way people see, think about, or speak about their goals and challenges? Being able to incorporate those angles and language will again have a better chance of stopping the scroll. Now, there are many other elements to story you can listen for and lean into, but the last one I want to touch on is emotion. When you ask for a story or frame your question in a way that invites stories rather than lists or facts, you are also inviting an expression of emotion. How did this experience make them feel? Are the emotions positive or negative? Simple or complex? Surface level or deep? Strong or just something that was passing? Similarly, how do they feel about it now? Have their emotions changed? And if so, how and why? Was it something that made a lasting impact? Or was it something they let go of quickly? Was it something they've continued to process and dwell on? Or is telling the story the first time they've revisited the emotions since the story happened? The emotions expressed may be part of the problem you need to speak to or part of the solution or experience you offer. And that matters. Are you implying or saying directly, we know who you are? Or are you saying, we know what you need? Are you inviting them to feel the emotions of the problem so you can tell them that there's hope or resources? Or are you inviting them to feel what it will feel like when they engage with what you have to offer? Or do you create a multi-step campaign or marketing pathway or funnel that begins with calling up the problem emotions first and then later inviting them into the emotions of having their problem solved? Now, emotions are powerful and tapping into them can be really effective, but we also need to use them responsibly. For more on that, check out our episode, How to Connect Emotionally Without Manipulating, back in our archive from October 2021.
And now let's take a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsor.
Christian Travel with Educational Opportunities Tours enriches the faith and lives of believers, empowers teachers and preachers, and energizes church ministry in unforgettable and lasting ways. Follow in the footsteps of Jesus as his life, death, and resurrection unfold before your eyes. You can also get involved in and learn about the struggles this region continues to encounter through contemporary travel options that we offer. Old and New Testament landscapes range from the Middle East all the way to Europe, and EO offers hundreds of departures and numerous unforgettable itineraries to choose from. Follow the missionary journeys of Paul in the Mediterranean. Engage in the historical and cultural implications of the scriptures when you visit ancient wonders in Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. Contact EO Tours at 800-247-0017 or at www.eo.travel for your journey of a lifetime today.
And now, back to our program.
Now, let's say the person you're talking to says something intriguing and you want to follow that specific trail. Or maybe they're talking in dry facts and you're not really having a research conversation, but you recognize an opportunity and you want to get them into story mode. Now, obviously, it would be odd to say, tell me that again, but this time as a story. That's where the second technique might help. And that is to say, ooh, tell me more about that. Now, you don't have to say the ooh part, but I just felt like that was part of it. You see, we process our experiences as stories. That's why narratives can be so powerful. Whether we're talking about books or TV shows or movies or narrative-based marketing approaches like StoryBrand, these things tap into how our brains already organize our lives. When we engage with powerful narratives, we connect with characters and their desires, their challenges, and hopefully their ultimate success, even if it doesn't resemble our own lives very much. You know, have you ever seen a TV show and the main character is nothing like you, and yet you feel connected because they're going through a journey you recognize? We have a kinship, a connection with other human beings living life. This also means that when we are put on the spot to talk about something we haven't prepared for, chances are pretty good that you will eventually lean into story. Now, if you're talking to someone who's an expert in something and you say, tell me more about that, they might flow into some set of facts because they're experienced in talking about that subject area. But especially if the opening you see is about the human condition or a set of circumstances or emotions or experiences, more often than not, a story will come to mind. This is also a really great non-judgmental, active listening technique. Particularly if you're engaged with someone who does not share your Christian faith, you may be asking someone to talk about a belief or experience or set of emotions that you don't agree with. Over the last year, I took a series of improv comedy classes, and you might be familiar with the first rule of improv, which is to always say yes. What this means is that when your scene partner says something or adds a detail to the scene, you acknowledge and accept what they say. So, for example, if you and I are doing a scene which is completely made up from scratch with no pre-planning, and you say something like, wow, look at this kitchen, and I say, this isn't a kitchen, it's a laundromat, I have completely ground the scene to a halt. We aren't on the same page, the audience is confused, and it's going to be really hard now to tell a story because we first have to figure out where we actually are and why one of us was so mistaken. A much better response would have been, yeah, check out those fancy ovens. They're way better than our old place. You see, in that response, I have said yes to you, accepting what you offered. Now, saying yes doesn't mean you will always literally agree. Let's say our scene continues. I just said, yeah, check out those fancy ovens. They're way better than our old place. And now you say to me, I'm sorry, chef. I thought I could do this, but now that we're here, I just can't. I quit. If I just agree with you, I might say something like, you're right, you can't do it. I accept your resignation. But then what happens? The scene's pretty much over, right? But what if I say, hey, I know our last kitchen was a pain, but shouldn't we at least try this fancy new one out first? Notice what happened. I've not only said yes to the fact that apparently I'm the chef and you're my employee and you're stressed, but I have said yes to your feeling frustrated without needing to agree that you must quit. So going back to our example of a conversation with someone not involved with the church, they might be telling you a story that you feel mischaracterizes the church or even your church, or they're expressing a worldview that you don't agree with. If you respond with, well, I disagree, but continue, that won't work, will it? It's also not authentic to say something like, yeah, I know what you mean. I've been there. But you can say, tell me more about that. You're inviting them to give you more or follow a specific direction in a way that acknowledges what they've said without passing judgment on it. It works extremely well with my 4-year-old, and it works with adults too. The third technique is helpful when you don't just want more information, but you want to go deeper. Our brains may process and organize our lives into stories, but that doesn't mean we've done a ton of reflection on those stories. This is why prayer and meditation, journaling, and seeing a therapist can have such a deep impact. They often invite us to reflect and process and go deeper. When we first tell a story, the details are often surface level, and the emotions are often surface level too. What we may share is what it felt like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what ultimately caused the emotions. We may have felt anger, but that anger may have been rooted in fear. We may have felt shame, but that shame may have been the result of a relationship or experience we've had in the past. You see, if tapping into surface level emotions alone is effective marketing, and it can be, you can really make someone feel known if you can tap into what lies below the surface. In that October 2021 episode on using emotion, we used the famous marketing example of selling a hammer and nails. You can advertise the benefits of that hammer, its weight, its balance, its comfort grip, its solid construction. You could advertise the price. Look, it's an affordable hammer. But when someone comes to the hardware store, their ultimate mission isn't to acquire a hammer. Very few people just collect hammers. The hammer is needed to complete whatever project needs the hammer. It might be hanging the first college degree in your family on the wall, or building a birdhouse with your grandchild. Do you see how that kind of marketing might resonate more deeply, but also how you have to go deeper than simply, I need a hammer? You see, the third technique is to ask the question, why? Either literally or in effect, and to ask it a couple of times in a row. It might take 3 or 4 whys before you really get somewhere. But getting below the surface matters. It's where you really begin to understand someone and how they see and respond to the world. One of my favorite comedians is Mike Birbiglia, and he recently described his process for incorporating audience feedback when he's shaping one of his shows. Here's what he said. I write what I believe is funny. I memorize it as best as I can. I share it with an audience, and I start to understand the Venn diagram of what they think is funny about what I think is funny, and what I think is funny about what I think is funny. And then I start to build from there. Now, did you notice? He didn't say, I start to understand the Venn diagram of what they think is funny and what I think is funny. But what he did say was that he wants to understand what they think is funny about what he thinks is funny. The first is just about finding the laughs. And is that helpful? Yeah, to a degree, yes, especially in the beginning. Keep the stuff people laugh at and improve or cut the rest. But he doesn't just want to find the laughs. He wants to understand the laughs. Why do they think this was funny? And why did I think it was funny? If he can understand that and find that common ground, he can do far more than deciding what to keep and what to cut. He can actually press deeper and actually create more material based off that understanding. The same is true in our church marketing. Especially in the world of social media, some posts really resonate and some die quick and quiet deaths. We can try to identify what posts perform well and do more of that, but if we can understand why they performed well, it will help us do more that resonates and not just copy ourselves over and over again. But to understand that, you often need to first ask someone why it resonated. Hear their surface level answer and then try to invite them to ask why a couple more times to really uncover what's going on. And now, listeners, we want to hear from you. What kind of conversations do you have to stay connected with your congregation and community? Do you have any tips or even specific questions that you have found to be really fruitful? Email us at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your thoughts, recommendations, your questions on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions for the show. We always love hearing from you. Now, as always, the easiest way to support the show and help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated over 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom